Okay, good morning, everyone. So I see that you said that you learned together the course of Tanya. I assume you're talking about warrior to warrior? You did it together? Okay. So there's no question that some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about today are also addressed in warrior to warrior. But we'll be talking about different ideas. I'm sure some of them that you've already encountered in Tanya and you probably talked about in depth. But these kind of sessions are invaluable because Tanya has 53 chapters, but it's in JLI. I'm an editor and a writer for JLI, so we have a whole philosophy about writing lessons, about writing courses, and we call it the point A to point B, which means that when we're writing a class, it's not okay. So there's a fascinating topic, and I'm going to give you information on that topic. Let me write you a class on marriage, or let me write you a class on Shabbos, or let me write you a class on Torah Shabbat. But rather, every single class and every single course has a point A to point B, which means that we say people are walking in with a certain perspective. That's what we call point A. Our goal is to get them to have a different perspective. We're not just trying to throw information at people, even if it's interesting information. We're trying to create a shift, a real shift in terms of perspective, an intellectual shift, an emotional shift in the people, and we're always working towards that. Anytime during a lesson, during a class, we always stop ourselves and ask, is this piece that I'm trying to put in, is that necessary in order to get us to point B? Or is I putting it in because I happen to think it's interesting nugget of information? And if that's the case, I throw it into a footnote, and you have to make sure that we're very tight. We have a path, and as they say, right, the shortest distance between two points is a straight line, and we're trying to get that straight line. In most Sfarim and Chassidus are not point A to point B. There's a larger point A and point B. The larger point A to point B is you're living in a world where you are engrossed in materialism and self-centeredness, and the point B is sit down for an hour and just engross your mind and immerse yourself in learning about Hashem and kind of lift yourself above the Gashmistic existence that most of us live, and put yourself in a higher and a deeper place. There's a story which the Rabbi once said, an interesting story. There was a chassid whose last name was Aronovich. I think Anshel. Pretty sure there was Anshel Aronovich. He lived around in the years around 1900. He lived around that time, and he reprinted the Likutei Torah. Likutei Torah is the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, and he reprinted it. And in the course of reprinting, there were 3,000 typos, 3,000 mistakes in the previous editions, which he fixed. And he brought the new Likutei Torah to the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab was very happy. And then, on his way back home, he was from the city of Nikolaev. That's the Rebbe's where the Rebbe was born. And his way back home, he stopped off in the city of Chernigov. In the city of Chernigov, there was a very famous Lubavitch chassid, an elderly Lubavitch chassid, whose name was Reb David Tzvi. And he showed to this Reb David Tzvi, he showed him the new Likutei Torah, the new print. And he saw that the Reb David Tzvi wasn't very happy about what he had done. And he couldn't understand, how could it be anything other than a positive development, reprinting the Torah and fixing all those errors? And Reb David Tzvi explains to him, he says, what did you accomplish? Up until now, a person looked at a mimer, and when you tried to read the mimer, it was difficult to understand. You realize that there's 3,000 typos, there's around 300 pages, so we're talking about 10 typos per page. So every few lines, you're stumbling across something which is difficult to understand, and you have to work your mind around it until you finally understand that there's a mistake here. You figure out what the mistake is, and then you proceed. So it took a long time to learn a mimer, because every time you encountered one of these mistakes, you have to stop and process what's going on. So let's say it took a person 2 hours to learn a mimer. Now you fixed all those typos. The person's going to learn the mimer in a half an hour. So what did you gain? That the person is learning Chassidus for an hour and a half less, which is an interesting perspective. Because if you're going from point A to point B, which is that it's about information and providing a certain understandings, tools, or strategies, then if I could get it in a half an hour, what's the point of spending 2 hours on it? But if the point of Chassidus is simply about putting your mind in a higher place, it's actually more about the time that your mind is there than the information, the amount of information that it processes. And this is true about every other sefer, almost every other book in Chassidus, with the exception of Tanya. Tanya is the ultimate A to B book. Tanya has a very clear goal, and the goal is not at all vague or ambiguous. The Alter Rebbe lays it out on the Sharblat, in the opening page of Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe says the goal is to make sense out of the pasuk, which means Moshe Rabbeinu turns to the Jews and says, you see this Torah that I'm giving it to you? It's practical, it's accessible, you can all do it. And most of us look at that pasuk and we say, what are you talking about? For me to live a Torah lifestyle, in machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action, and also with emotion and feeling, on a constant, you tell me you want that on Yom Kippur? Okay, I get that, that's practical. You want to throw one also Pesach? Okay. You even want to do it 1 hour a day? Okay, I think I could do that also. But 24/7, 365 days a year, that I should, my mind, my heart, my mouth, my behaviors, everything should be aligned with Torah. That doesn't seem kikarev. It doesn't seem something which is practical. And the Alter Rebbe says this sefer, from chapter 1, from Perek Aleph through chapter 53, is going to give you the understandings, and most importantly, the skills, tools, and strategies which are necessary to be able to live a life which is a Torah life in thought, speech, action, and also bilvavcha in the heart at all times. That is the goal of Tanya. There is no extra word in Tanya. There is no extra chapter in Tanya. There's the famous story about which the Rebbe writes. The Rebbe writes this in his Rishimis, that the Alter Rebbe's brother once walked in as the Alter Rebbe was writing Tanya, and he sees the Alter Rebbe is deep in thought, and he says, my brother, what's preoccupying your mind? A penny for your thoughts. And the Alter Rebbe tells him, I'm busy writing here Tanya, and there's a certain area in Tanya, I'm not sure whether to add a vav or not. A vav is like a conjunction letter. It's like adding an and. I don't know whether I should add the and or not, the vav. And I'm thinking about this already for 6 weeks, about this vav. Now that already is pretty incredible to tell you about the precision of Tanya, but it's actually the next line, which is the most mind-blowing line. Alter Rebbe continued and he said, every time that I add a vav in Tanya, I rethink the entire book. I rethink the entire structure. It's not just that he's thinking about in the context of this particular sentence or paragraph or even chapter, does this vav, does this word belong, this conjunction belong? I need to rethink the entire work, which shows you how the Alter Rebbe views Tanya as a cohesive whole, which is why in the beginning, before the recording began, I mentioned how really the real learning of Tanya is the second time you're learning Tanya, because you're already beginning to have the larger picture of Tanya. Because a lot of times you're could be on the road and you get lost in the local scenery and how beautiful it is, and you forget about the destination. And the same thing is also when studying Tanya, there's so much beauty and so much information in every single perek and every chapter that sometimes you can lose sight of the larger goals that we're trying to accomplish over here, which is why what you're doing over here and bringing in people at certain junctures in Tanya and zooming out, so to say. Where are we? What are we trying to accomplish? What did we learn? And what do we still need to learn is vital to a larger understanding of Tanya. And really developing a Tanya mindset. Because Tanya is not about a collection of ideas. Tanya is meant to convey us a certain perspective and approach to life. But that perspective and approach emerges from the larger picture. There are a lot of, yes, you can learn just a chapter of Tanya and gain a lot of information from there. But again, the Tanya perspective and approach requires that larger picture. So you're holding by chapter 9 in Tanya. Up until this point in Tanya, you've been learning you might want to say the nuts and bolts. You've been learning about the different components of the human psyche, the spiritual psyche. And you've been learning all about the nefesh elokis and the nefesh habahamis. The nefesh elokis, nefesh habahamis is the most foundational idea in Tanya. There is no chapter in Tanya that can be properly understood if you don't have the Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Bahamis paradigm of the Alter Rebbe. And it's a huge game changer. The Alter Rebbe is helping us with our struggle in life. But the very first thing the Alter Rebbe does, even before he gives us skills and strategies for how to be successful in our struggle to life, the most important thing maybe the Alter Rebbe does is defining the struggle. Defining the struggle before we get to how to deal with the struggle. And the understanding that we have two entirely different identities. Not that we're one identity which is pulled in multiple directions, which that's normal. Every single human being is pulled in multiple directions. If you ever sat down by a table and someone put a piece of cake in front of you, right away you were pulled in two directions. One direction is you want to eat the cake, and the other direction is you don't want to eat the cake. But that does not imply that you have a nefesh ha-cake and nefesh ha-diet. It doesn't imply that you have a soul, a cake soul and a diet soul. No, that's not two identities. It's a single identity, and your single desire for gratification. Now the problem is that gratification can be gained in so many different ways. You can be gratified, but you can gain gratification by eating the cake. You can gain gratification by not eating the cake. You can gain gratification by giving the cake away to someone else, by the way. That's a third form of gratification. So you can be pulled in multiple directions, but that doesn't mean you have multiple identities. And up until the Alter Rebbe came along, the way that the human being and the Jew was understood was that we're pulled in many directions. And our decision is going to be, what am I going to do? Will I eat the cake or will I not eat the cake, or will I give it away? Will I do the mitzvah? Will I not do the mitzvah? Will I do the avera? Will I not do the avera? And the Alter Rebbe comes along and says, there's something much deeper going on over here. The ultimate struggle in life is not what you're going to do, but who you're going to be. Are you going to channel and identify with your nefesh halikis, your godly identity? Are you going to channel and identify with your nefesh habahamis, your self-centered identity? And these are two polar opposites. The nefesh habahamis is self-centered, the nefesh halikis is godly-centered. To the nefesh halikis, there is no dirtier word than self. If you're following the Tanya in the recent days, in Chitas, the way the Alter Rebbe describes what the nefesh halikis, if you took the nefesh halikis and took it to a psychiatrist and laid it down on a couch, and you asked your nefesh halikis, what's the one thing that bothers you more than anything else? The nefesh halikis would answer, that I am. Because that I am includes the word I, and I bothers me. And that's why the neshama is compared to a candle, which is a flame, which is constantly, it's striving to leave the wick. The wick is the body. The flame is the neshama. It wants to reunite with Hashem and be subsumed in Hashem and become nothing. It doesn't want there to be anything other than Hashem. It's the opposite of self-centered. So we have these two identities. And the question in life isn't what I'm going to do, it's who I'm going to be. So, for example, if I have this piece of cake in front of me, what am I going to do? It's possible that both the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis agree that I should eat the cake. The Nefesh Bahamis wants to eat the cake because it tastes good. The Nefesh Elokis wants to eat the cake because it knows that the person's about to go daven and it's going to give some energy. So the question isn't what I'm going to do. It's not the question. The question is, when I'm eating the cake, who am I? Am I a godly person? Or am I a self-centered person? Am I Nefesh Elokis? Or am I Nefesh Bahamis? And this larger understanding of the two identities that are within us, and the big question in life is, which identity will I be? And that's the choice that we have. The choice we have is, am I going to be a godly person? In which case, everything I do is godly. Am I going to be a self-centered person? And in the first 8 chapters of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe dissects each one of these identities in a very organized fashion. Chapter 1 of Tanya is the substance of the Nefesh Bahamis. The substance of the Nefesh Bahamis is Klipa. Chapter 2, the substance of the Nefesh Elokis. The substance of the Nefesh Elokis is Chelek Elokam Imal, godliness. Chapter 3, the core components of the Nefesh Elokis, which are the seichel and midas, chachma bina das chesed gvura, intellectual and emotional attributes and capacities. That's chapter 3. Chapter 4 and chapter 5 are the garments of the nefesh elikis, the machshava dibur maisa. Then we move on. Chapter 6 is the chapter 6 and 7 and 8 are the core components and the garments and the agenda of the nefesh habahamis. And with that, after having finished these 8 chapters, we have an understanding of our 2 identities. But what we don't yet know, and this is where we're heading right now, is how do these 2 identities, how do they interact with each other? What is their relationship? And I know that there is an nefesh elikis. We learned about that. I know that there's an nefesh habahamis. We learned about that. But how do I navigate the 2 of them? What causes the nefesh elikis to be victorious sometimes? What causes the nefesh habahamis to be victorious sometimes? That has not yet been discussed. Up until now in Tanya, we were talking about the nefesh elikis and nefesh habahamis as separate identities. We did not talk at all about the relationship. And that's where we're going to start talking about. That's chapter 9, begins with that, begins this topic of, suddenly we're going to start learning right now about the relationship between the 2. So we're going to learn about Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha. And Rabbi Friedman mentioned to me that the next segment of Tanya you're going to be learning is chapter 9 through chapter 17. And yes, that is one segment, but really it's one segment. Excuse me, 1 second, there's a song behind me. Let me turn that off. But that one segment is actually divided into 2 parts, because the first part, I would say chapters 9 through 13, or maybe through the middle of 14, the Alter Rebbe there is talking about Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha, and defining those. And from the middle of chapter, towards the end of chapter 14 through chapter 17, the Alter Rebbe gives us already the first strategy in Kikara Ve'elecha, our first strategy, which will allow us to become a Beinoni. So we have these 2 parts over here. And let's talk a little about both of these ideas, which you're going to be encountering in the coming chapters. In terms of, okay, I have a nefesh elikis, I have a nefesh habahamis, my nefesh elikis, but where am I? At the end of the day, my behavior, my personality, where am I? So the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that there are 3 possible internal states which I can have. And that's going to be very important to remember. Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha are not behaviors. These are all internal states. Any behaviors of a tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha are a result of the person's internal state. So for example, to make a statement and say that a person is a Rasha because he has done an Avera, in Tanya terminology, that would be incorrect. You're not a Rasha because you do an Avera, you do an Avera because you're a Rasha. But let's talk about this a little and explain a little more what I mean by that. And I'm going to start with the Beinoni. The nefesh elikis, nefesh habahamis are 2 identities which in many ways they mirror each other. They both have seichel, they both have midas, they both have intellectual faculties, they both have emotional faculties. But there's a very important difference between the godly soul and the natural soul. And that is the godly soul, and this is the very first part. This can be a very key section, the very first lines of chapter 9 in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us the godly soul, although it has emotions, is primarily intellectual. It's based in the mind. Whereas the animal soul, the nefesh habahamis, the natural soul, although it has intellect, it's primarily emotional. Why is that so important to understand? Because in chapter 12, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to one of the, maybe the most important rule in Tanya. And that is moyach shalat al halev. The mind controls the heart. That is the natural state of the human being. The mind, our logic, our brain, controls our entire body, including our hearts, including our emotions. Which means that the godly soul, because it's intellectual, has a natural advantage over the animal soul. To put that in simple words, what that means is, if both your godly soul and your natural soul are at maximum capacity, they are fully activated. Your heart is fully activated. It desires and lusts and everything in the world. You're filled with jealousy and anger and impulses and pettiness and every other heart-based nefesh habahamis trait that you can think of. Again, your nefesh habahamis is at full force. It's maximum. It's maximized. However, if your nefesh elikis, which is in the mind, if your nefesh elikis is also fully exerted and operating at maximum capacity, the result is going to be that you will never do an avera, because the mind always controls the heart. And that is the Beinoni. The Beinoni is someone who has not conquered the animal soul, meaning its feelings, its urges, its impulses, its desires are all there 100%. And nevertheless, the Beinoni is someone who is never going to do an avera, and the Beinoni is someone who will do all the mitzvahs, everything they're supposed to do. And why is that? Because the mind controls the heart. And this is something that we are all aware of also in our personal life. If we can have desires, but if our mind is absolutely dead set on something, our mind is going to win. When will our heart win? When the mind weakens. But if the mind is not weakened at all, if we have thought about something and resolved something in our mind, we have the ability to overcome any feeling that we have, any urge that we have, any impulse that we have, if the mind is right. That is the Beinoni. So the Beinoni is someone who the nefesh habahamis, nefesh elikis are both running, operating at full strength. Now, there are two possible ways to move away from being a Beinoni, which is, one is that the nefesh elikis is not operating at full capacity, and one is that the nefesh habahamis is not operating at full capacity. So if the nefesh elikis is not operating at full capacity, that means that now the nefesh habahamis is going to have an advantage. That is called a rasha. If the nefesh habahamis has somehow been compromised and its feelings are not as powerful and strong as they are to a natural human being, that is a tzaddik. Okay, so Beinoni is a person who is nefesh elikis, nefesh habahamis, both at full strength. Meaning, yes, the person, the heart is going wild, the heart has not been tamed, but nevertheless, in machshava dibur ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action, the person is perfect. Why? Because the nefesh elikis is operating at full force. Now, what happens if my mind isn't fully, my nefesh elikis isn't fully activated and maximized and exerted? My nefesh habahamis is, my heart is still fully active. The result is that creates an imbalance, and the result is I will do averis. Why am I doing averis? Because I'm a rasha. Rasha is a description of an internal state. The internal state, which makes someone a rasha, is a state where the nefesh elikis has been compromised, or it's not running at full capacity. Now, a rasha will do averis. How often will a rasha do an avera? How big is the imbalance? The bigger the imbalance, the more frequent the averis will be, and the more severe the averis will be. If it's a slight imbalance, meaning if your nefesh elikis is running at 99% capacity, you're going to do averis very infrequently, and they're going to be small averis, because 99% is still very powerful. That means 99% of the time, you will overcome your animal soul. 1% of the time, you won't. If your nefesh elikis, if someone's nefesh elikis has been severely compromised, then that person will do more averis. And then there is the tzaddik, which is the opposite way. The tzaddik is someone who's managed to work on him or herself to the point that they've actually, to a certain extent, neutered and trained and tamed the nefesh habahamis, the desires, the temptations, the feelings, the impulses are much weaker. The tzaddik, instead, the tzaddik's emotions, holy emotions, love of God, awe of God, are very powerful, which have put the feelings of the nefesh habahamis to sleep, in remission, perhaps even in a state of latency where they're not even felt. But that is the imbalance on the other side. So these are the three types of people that we have. On the one side, we have the tzaddik, and the tzaddik is, in the middle, we have the beinoni, which is nefesh kis, nefesh habahamis, both operating at full capacity. Rasha, on the other side, where the nefesh kis is not operating at full capacity. Tzaddik on the other side, where the nefesh habahamis is not operating at full capacity. Does anyone have any questions, any thoughts before we continue? This is not meant to be 100% a monologue. Or are we good? Okay, at any point, if anyone has any question, you can, or thoughts, you can unmute yourself and share. The Alter Rebbe tells us that for the average human being, our goal in life is to be a beinoni. Why? Why shouldn't our goal be to be a tzaddik? So in fact, actually, we should have a goal to be a tzaddik. People think, can I be a tzaddik? No, of course I can't be a tzaddik. Well, how do you know you can't be a tzaddik? The only way you can know that you can't be a tzaddik is if you achieve the beinoni status, and then you kept on trying and working on yourself, and you hit a ceiling, and you can't move on any further. Then you know that you can't be a tzaddik. But if you're not even a beinoni, you can't know that you can't be a tzaddik. Every tzaddik is born like me and you. The only difference between a tzaddik and me and you is in the potential of the neshama, but that potential has to be realized, and that takes a lot of work. People aren't born tzaddikim. It doesn't work that way. So it's very possible that any one of us could be a tzaddik if we keep on working, using the strategies that the Alter Rebbe talks about in Tanya. So it's very possible that we can become tzaddikim. However, that's not an expectation. Why? Because it's possible that we can't be tzaddikim. And why is that? Because to be a tzaddik requires changing the heart, meaning really compromising or weakening the nefesh habahamis, weakening the desires, the temptations, the feelings, the emotions of the nefesh habahamis. And although, as we will see as we continue today, we try to work on our feelings, and we try to elevate and refine our feelings and make them holy. Ultimately, that's not 100% in our control. It's not in our control. So can we strive to be a tzaddik? Absolutely. Should we strive to be a tzaddik? Yeah. One of the ironies of Tanya, which is the book of Beinanim, is that the very first words of tzaddik of Tanya are to hit tzaddik, be a tzaddik, which is interesting. Tanya opens up with the statement, Tanya b'seif per gimel v'nida, mashbiya ma'aseh, they make a person swear before he or she comes down to this world, to hit tzaddik, be a tzaddik. And this is the book of Beinanim. Yeah, absolutely. We should strive to be a tzaddik. We should strive to weaken the nefesh habahamis. But that's not an expectation. The goal is to be a beinoni. A beinoni means that you make sure that your nefesh halikis is exerted 100% and fully activated, to the point where in thought, speech, and action, you're doing the right thing because your mind controls your heart. So that is the first part of the upcoming segment of Tanya you're going to be learning about. Is, again, first 9 chapters. It's important to have somewhat of a picture of Tanya in your head. First 9 chapters is discussing nefesh halikis, nefesh habahamis, each one as individual components. And then now we're moving on, chapter 9 through around chapter 13. The next thing is that we need to discuss the relationship with each other. And depending on your relationship with your nefesh halikis and your nefesh habahamis, you can be in one of these categories: tzaddik, rasha, or beinoni. And this is something which I find even people who have learned Tanya for a long time, when I make the statement to them, many of them are surprised. I ask a person many times, okay, so if your nefesh elokis and nefesh habahamis are both at full capacity, then what is the result of such a person? If both of them are operating at maximum capacity, and most people will say Russia, because the nefesh habahamis is operating at maximum capacity, but that's incorrect. The Beinoni is someone who by him the nefesh elokis is one nefesh habahamis is 100% operational. Okay. So now we know the nefesh elokis, nefesh habahamis. We know about the relationship with each other. But we keep on saying over here, if your nefesh elokis is at full strength, how do I get my nefesh elokis to full strength? How do I become a Beinoni? How do I make sure that my nefesh elokis is always operating at maximum capacity, which is again the definition of what a Beinoni is? So for this, the Alter Rebbe is going to give us two strategies. And the first strategy, again, begins towards the end of chapter 14 and takes you through chapter 17. And that's the longer strategy. And then we're going to have what's called the Derech Ketzara, the shorter strategy, which is going to take us from chapter 18 through chapter 25. That's one of the quirks in Tanya, that the longer strategy takes around 3 chapters to learn, and the shorter strategy takes around 7 chapters to learn. That's it's more, and arguably the study of the shorter strategy is much more difficult than the study of the longer strategy. In other words, chapters 18 through 25 is much more complex than chapters 15 through 17. But that's just in terms of understanding what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say. In terms of implementation in real life, the shorter strategy is there and accessible and available at all times. It's a stopgap measure, whereas the longer strategy takes more time to implement. Strategy number 1 is Chabad. If you ask someone, what is Chabad? And someone would come and ask me, what is Chabad? I would tell them, study chapters 15, 16, and 17 in Tanya. Why do I say that is Chabad? What is Chabad? Chabad is Chachma Bina Das. Chabad is thought, Chachma Bina Das, commonly translated as wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, but probably more accurately translated as awareness, processing, and connection. Chachma is awareness, revelation. Bina is processing, and Das is connection. And a lot of people have a tough time with this. You know, we know the Chabad of mitzvah tanks, and the Chabad of shlichus, and the Chabad of connection to the Rebbe, and now you tell me the essence of Chabad is some sort of cognitive, mental exercise. It doesn't sound Chabad, actually. Chabad doesn't sound Chabad. Is that really the essence of what Chabad is? But the answer is yes. Chabad ultimately is about what I call trickle-down spiritualnomics. It's about complete transformation, and complete transformation starts from the top. And the top is the head. When we talk about the 10 koiches, or the 10 spheres, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus, they sound like highly spiritual terms. In reality, the process of which begins with Chachma and ends with Malchus is the process that describes our lives 24/7. If you start at the bottom is Malchus. Malchus means action or speech. Whenever you do something, or whenever you say something, go to a good therapist, sit down for an hour, and that therapist can tell you, where did that action, where did that behavior come from? those words, nothing starts with action. Action or words are always the culmination and the outcome of an internal process, which is why Malchus is compared to the moon, and the moon doesn't have its own light. It receives the light. Malchus, which is speech and action, is a result of an internal process. What is that internal process? So again, working backwards over here. Actions are motivated by feelings. Every action is motivated by a feeling. If there was no feeling, there's too big of a gap. Actually, Dr. is going to talk about this a little in chapter 16. There's too big of a gap between the intellect and action. Just understanding that something is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do is not going to lead to action. Feelings lead to action. It needs to feel right for me in order to do something, or I won't do something because it feels wrong. So feelings lead to action. Where do feelings come from? Feelings come from Chabad. Chabad means, Chochmah is when I become aware of something. Awareness can come either from outside of me or from a deeper part inside of me, from my subconscious, but that's Chochmah. Chochmah is something which is revealed to me, which by Chochmah is compared to sight, to seeing. Something becomes revealed to me, either from outside of me or from someplace very deep inside me. What's the next thing I do? Bina, I process it. I mentally, now I'm going to process that awareness that I have, and then I connect to it, which is das. I make it personal, and then what happens is what naturally results is feelings, and from the feelings results behaviors. So every behavior or word that you say, if you trace it back, it's traced back to a certain awareness, which you then processed, which you then connected to, which therefore you had a feeling about, which led you to that behavior. So where do we, if I'm a Yid who wants to serve Hashem, which parts of me are important? The most important part is behavior, right? But where does the transformation begin? If I have only what's called Kabbalah's oil, acceptance of the yoke, that means I'm ignoring my feelings. I'm going to ignore my mind, and I'm going to exert my willpower to do the right thing. That's one way of serving Hashem. What if I'm a chassid, but not a Chabad chassid? Then we're going to do something else. I'm going to ignite my feelings artificially, so to say, through external stimulation and inspiration, and those feelings will lead to actions, which means now which parts of me become holy? My feelings and my behaviors. If I'm a Chabad chassid, what that means is that I start from the very top. I work on my Chachma, Bina, and Das. I work on my understanding and my processing and what I intellectually connect to, which creates the midas, the feelings, which then leads to behavior, which, what does that mean? That means I holistically and completely transformed myself into a holy being. So the first strategy the Alter Rebbe is going to give us, you want to be a Beinoni, you want to have your Nefesh Elokis operating at full force, at 100% capacity. It starts with the mind. And this is something which today is much easier to understand, because the most common form of therapy today is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I sometimes wonder how they got the T wrong. It should be CBD, Chachma Bina Das, because what is cognitive behavioral therapy? The theory of cognitive behavioral therapy is that when there's a pathology, when there's something wrong in a person's behavior, which is why it's called a behavioral therapy, there are different types of behavioral therapies. But the common denominator between all behavioral therapies is that they're focused on achieving a change in behavior. So there are different behavioral disorders. It could be eating disorder, it could be a sleep disorder, it could be an anxiety, whatever it is, which leads to behavioral disorders. Cognitive behavioral therapy means we fix it by fixing the thought patterns, the way we think, because the way we think changes the way we feel changes the way we behave. And is there a better description for Chabad than that? The way we think impacts the way we feel impacts the way we behave. And when you're in that place, when you are and therefore, when you're in a holy place in your mind, in terms of integrating the concepts of Hasidus, our understandings of Hashem, our understandings of the Neshama, our understandings of Torah, our understandings of the world, and most importantly, we have Das, connection. Because of the three intellectual faculties, yes, there's awareness processing, but you could be aware of something, you could have fully processed it and fully understood it. But if you didn't connect it, you're missing the Das element, that's not going to lead to the feelings. But if we fully have the Chachma Bina and Das, the awareness, the mental processing, the mental connection, the feelings, that is the way to make sure that your Nefesh Elokis is operating fully 100%, and you are totally ready to counter anything of the Nefesh HaBahamis. Your Nefesh HaBahamis can be also at full strength. Your Nefesh HaBahamis can also be operating at 100% capacity. It doesn't make a difference. If you're following this method, you will be able to counter your Nefesh HaBahamis at all times and in all places. That is the first strategy that Rabbi is giving us, and that takes us again from chapters around 15 through chapter 17. But obviously it takes time, because developing our understanding and the processing and the connection and developing the feelings, it's not something which takes it's not something which is overnight. Tanya is work, but once we've done that work, we are in a very, very safe, comfortable place of a Beinoni, and we do not have to be fearful or worry about the Nefesh HaBahamis, not because it's not there, it might be there, but we are perfectly positioned and empowered to battle the Nefesh HaBahamis. Now, before we move on to our next point, again, any thoughts, questions?
Rabbi Silberberg, do you know any Beinonis?
Do I know any Beinonis? Okay.
That's a question that comes up in our discussions often.
Okay. The next point we're going to talk about is going to address that. Do we know any Beinonis? One of the biggest revelations that I had in studying Tanya, and the understandings that emerged, not from learning one chapter or two chapters, but from the overall learning Tanya once, twice, three times, teaching it, is that every single one of us is a Rasha, every single one of us is a Beinoni, and every single one of us is a Tzaddik. So the answer to your question is yes, and that would be me. And let me explain what I mean. And this understanding is also so important in terms of being able to make Tanya practical. What is a Rasha? A Rasha is someone who struggles in a certain area. Sorry, a Rasha is someone who struggles and has a success rate of anywhere between 0% and 99.9%. That's a Rasha. A Beinoni is someone who struggles with a success rate of 100%. And a Tzaddik is someone who doesn't struggle. I know that's simplifying it, but that's the definition of Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha. And every single one of us, we have areas in our life where we are Rasha, areas in our life where we are a Beinoni, and areas in our life where we are a Tzaddik. There are some areas in my life wherein I struggle, and which I fail. How often do I fail? There are some areas in my life where I am what's called, you learn about a Rasha Virali. A Rasha Virali not only fails all the time, but has reached a place of spiritual numbness and doesn't even feel regret for failing. What are the areas in my life or in your life where you don't even struggle anymore because you fail and you've given up and it doesn't even bother you anymore? Those are your Rasha Virali areas. Then there are the other areas in my life, let's say saying chitas. If I am successful in saying chitas anywhere between 0% and 99.9% of the time, then I'm a Russia in that area. Even if it's, again, even if 99.9% of the time I say chitas every day, I'm a Russia in that area. Then there are areas in my life in which I'm a Beinani. So if you're going to come over to me on Tisha B'Av at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a pie of pizza, and you're going to put it in front of me, I'm going to salivate. I'm going to want some of that pizza. What are the chances of me actually eating a slice? 0. That makes me a Beinani in that area. Why? Because a tzaddik, if you stuck a piece of pizza in front of a tzaddik on Tisha B'Av, the tzaddik might just throw up just from seeing the pizza on Tisha B'Av. The tzaddik doesn't have a desire. There is no struggle. Tzaddik has no desire for anything which is negative. Or any other area in life, davening every day, very common. Do people struggle with davening? Absolutely. But for the average chassid, davening every day, it's not a question of if I will do it. It doesn't mean that but it's still a struggle. Yeah, I have to get up. I have to do it. I'm not interested in doing it. I'd rather not. I'd rather sleep in. Those are Beinani areas in our lives. And every one of us can identify in our lives, Russia areas, Beinani areas. And then there are tzaddik areas in our lives. There are those mitzvahs which we enjoy. There is no struggle. When it comes Pesach, the first night of Pesach, and I need to go to the Seder, I'm not like, oh man, Seder now? For 2 hours? No, I'm excited. Maybe the second night, not as excited, but definitely the first night, I'm excited. Okay? There are other mitzvahs that there is no struggle. I pasha love them. Okay, everyone has their mitzvahs, in which that's their area. Maybe for some person, that's achnas sarchin. Maybe for another person, it is saying chitas udavri. There is no struggle. They're excited about it. And there's certain averas which for every single one of us aren't a struggle because we're repulsed by the thought of that avera. Those are tzaddik areas. Now, if your goal in life is to become a Beinani, you probably will never become a Beinani. But what if you sat down and you made a list of your life and you put everything into 3 columns? The Rasha column, the Beinani column, and the Tzaddik column. And you say, which areas in my Rasha column do I want to move into my Beinani column? Which areas of my life? And then realize that the strategies that the Alter Rebbe is talking about in Tanya are for that. That's a recipe for success. So let's take an area, for example. Let's say a person is struggling in the area of Kibbud of the Aim. For example, Kibbud of the Aim is not an easy mitzvah. How do you go about it? What is the Chabad approach? What is the Tanya strategy? Remember, we said that Tanya in general is comprised of 2 strategies. The longer way, which we just talked about, the shorter way, which is later. And both strategies will work for Kibbud of Aim. What would be the Chabad approach to Kibbud of Aim? I sit down, first of all, and it's not an overnight project. The first thing is I want to do for a few weeks is I want to learn all about Kibbud of Aim. I want to learn about the topic. I want to learn what it says in the Sfarim about it. That's the awareness. I process that. And then I need to make time for das. I need to make time to personalize, to connect to what I'm learning, to connect it on a personal level, to connect to the idea of parents, to connect to my parents in my mind. And what's going to happen? At a certain, this is going to lead you to be a Beinani in that area. When your parents call you up, or when something's necessary to do for your parents, you're going to do it because you've strengthened your nefesh halakis in this area to 100% capacity. The same thing is true about davening. The same thing is true about saying chitas. Any area in your life which you want to move from the Rasha column to the Beinani column, this is the way to go. This is strategy number 1. Again, in a year from now, or not a year, or in 6 months from now, you'll get a strategy number 2, and you're gonna have to learn how to apply strategy number 2 to that also. But that's beyond our conversation that we're having here today. And this is a strategy. And in life, it's probably never wise to be working on more than 2 areas at one time. I'd say 2 is the max. But a chassid And a Tanya person, it always has that in mind. Again, yeah, I want to be a Beinoni, so I'm going to think about the greatness of God that I'm going to become a Beinoni. I don't know if that's ever worked for anyone. To answer your question, Rabbi Friedman, I don't know if that's ever worked. But do people change? Do people grow? Do people move things from one column to the next? Absolutely. And you know what? If you move enough things from column Russia to column Beinoni, one day by mistake, you might actually be a Beinoni in entirety. But setting your goal over there is almost foolhardy. I teach Tanya here in Crown Heights in seminary. And one thing that the girls come in, all having learned about when they're, is always they talk about Beinoni moments. Can I have some moments on my day to be a Beinoni? I am very opposed to Beinoni moments. I don't think they're useful. I don't think they lead you anywhere. I mean, obviously, it's nice to take 5 minutes of your day and not to do any averos. Now, that's a standalone, beautiful thing. But it's not real. Why? You think about it for a second. A Beinoni is an internal state, as we mentioned. Russia is an internal state. Tzaddik is an internal state. Beinoni is an internal state. You don't enter an internal state in 5 minutes. It doesn't do anything for you. What we're doing is actually, we're trying to transform ourselves into Beinonis, which is, again, Beinoni is not a behavior. The behaviors are a result of the internal state of that balance that we're talking about. And we tackle it one area at a time. And what's interesting is what you're going to learn about also in the end of chapter 14 is that in life, not only are we trying to move things from the Russia column into the Beinoni column, we are also trying to move things from the Beinoni column into the Tzaddik column, which, as we mentioned earlier, is why Tanya begins with the words Tehi Tzaddik. What areas in my life can I develop a passion for, to the point that I don't have to struggle anymore? Now, does that mean that I'll be a tzaddik one day? First of all, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's any reason why we should exclude that possibility. We have to have faith in ourselves. But even if not, is there an area of my life I already am a tzaddik? Yeah. So why can't I be a tzaddik in another area of my life also? Maybe kibbud av'aim. If I learn enough about it, not only will I be a Beinoni in that area, I will actually be excited about it. Maybe davening, if I actually do enough Chabad work, CBD work on it, maybe not only will I be perfect in it, in machshava diber ma'isa, in thought, speech, and action, maybe I can actually reach a place where I wake up in the morning and I'm excited to daven, and there isn't a struggle. And that's really what Tanya is all about. Tanya is all about, there is an expectation that we're moving things in the direction of Beinoni. And we're always working on that in our life. We're identifying areas and trying to become Beinoni in that area. Becoming a tzaddik is not an expectation, because you might work on a certain area your entire life and not become a tzaddik in that area. But it is, at the same time, it is part of our work. It's part of our work. There's an expectation to move from Russia to Beinoni. Part of our work is to try to even push it further and try to become a tzaddik. And these two strategies, which you're going to be learning about in the coming year or so, the derech harucha and the derech kitzara, the longer way and the shorter way, these are the ways to address individual areas in our life. And I want to conclude. They say that that when the Alter Rebbe first printed Tanya, so someone went and brought the Tanya to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. And Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, his comment and response to Tanya was, how did he manage to fit such a great God into such a small book? So I once heard someone saying, what does that mean, a great God into a small book? So I once heard an idea. Imagine you had a $20,000 bill in your wallet. And you also had a $20 bill in your wallet. Now, which one is more valuable? We know. $20,000 bill. But which one is more useful? The $20,000 bill, get yourself a safe in your house, stick it in there. It's very valuable, but you can't go and buy yourself a slice of pizza with it. sometimes something is so big and so great that it becomes irrelevant. It's not useful to us. And perhaps what Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev was saying, that the Alter Rebbe took a great God and put it into a small book, means he put it into small things. He made it relevant to us. He made this great God relevant to us in our lives. And maybe I can add over here that there are many people who learn Tanya and still they're looking at it in a very big picture and they're not applying it to the practical areas in their life. The skills and strategies of Tanya are meant to be implemented practically in the area of life that's bothering you. You have to remember, when someone walked into Yechidus to Alter Rebbe, which is really what Tanya is all about, he didn't say, Rebbe, I have a problem. I'm not a Beinoni. That's not what, no one ever said that. Well, today we have the catchphrase, right? Said no one ever, right? No one ever went into Alter Rebbe and said, you know what my problem with life is? I'm not a Beinoni. These were real people with real issues, with real struggles in Avodas Hashem, particular struggles, because every struggle is particular. When it comes to general, it's not real. And yes, the Alter Rebbe is giving us larger general solutions, but they're meant to be implemented in the small areas of our lives, in the small struggles of our life. If I encounter a certain area in my life where it seems Kikar Veilecha isn't correct, it's not practical, and I don't find myself capable of being perfect in this area, Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to help you, yes, in this area. So these larger skills and strategies that Alter Rebbe is using, we have to remember also to use them very particularly in the smaller areas and issues in our life. Any thoughts or questions?